Hello, welcome to this webinar about assistive technology to support learners with SEND. I'm Phil McIntyre, currently work at Beaumont College and also for NatSpec. What we're going to be dealing with today is just having a look through a few different subjects about enabling access for learners who you might be working with. So what we're going to focus on today is what you've got already, what you can access for free or for cheap, and then also what if none of that works. So we're going to start off looking at a bit of Windows access. We're going to deal with some access through iPads and some useful apps that you can download to help with access through an iPad or to an iPad. Then we'll have a look at some applications that you can get for free that might be useful for some learners, and then thinking about what if none of that works. Now, a lot of this today might be, some of it will be focusing on the physical access. That will probably be the majority of it, which is critical to get sorted before you can even start dealing with any kind of access to applications or anything like that. So let's dive straight in then and have a look at what have you got first. So this is thinking about within your school or college or provision, what do you already have there that you might be able to access? Now, what I did before this webinar, when I was preparing the presentation, I just thought, right, off the top of my head, I'm going to just type out what I think is out there already, what there is in both Windows, Mac, iPad, tablet systems that you can get access to that's built in, that's kind of baked into the system, if you like. So this list on the right, I'm not going to go through all of these today, but these are a lot of the features that are there that you can change access to the keyboard, to the screen, to the size, to the way things look, the way the mouse works. You can change it so you can speak into a device. You can change so that you can get speech out of a device as well. And all of this stuff is just in there, ready to go. It's really a case of knowing how to get to it. So what I'm going to do first is think about how could we get to some of this stuff on Windows. Now, within Windows operating system itself, whether you're on Windows 7, 8 or 10, there is a setting in the control panel called the Ease of Access Center. This is your central hub, if you like, for getting to all your accessibility settings. And it will enable you to make visual, auditory, physical changes to the way the computer works, which might make someone's access more easy or indeed available at all. So this is within the Windows settings, a Windows control panel. Now, this should be available on every Windows machine that learners access within your setting. And if you go after this session to look at some PCs and you can't get access to this, then you need to be asking why not. These settings are critical really for you to be able to assist learners to be able to get access, but also for learners to be able to access themselves so that they can set it up to suit them. So if you find that you're not able to get to these settings, then ask the question, why not? Go to your technical support people, whoever they are, and ask them why students can't get access to this. If they don't know, well, ask them whether they can solve the problem. Be nice to start off with, you know, take them biscuits, take them cake, be friendly, and see if you can find a way around that. If you don't get anywhere with a nice approach, then later on you might need to be looking at a more direct approach and saying, well, if we can't get access to these settings, then we're limiting students' access, and technically we're breaking the law because we are not providing equivalent access to students with a disability as we do for students without a disability. If need be, and I've known settings that have had to do this in the past, you might then need to get senior management involved to directly tell the technicians to make this happen. So make sure they're available, those settings, and ideally have them linked to a roaming profile. I'll talk a bit more about roaming profiles in a minute, but that's critical to accessibility as well. Now, before we get into these settings and showing you how they work, suffice to say you can get the similar sort of settings on a Mac. I'm not going to deal with Mac today because we just don't have time to do all of this, and PCs are the most commonly found computers around. But you can get access to very similar settings that we'll deal with today in the Mac accessibility options. Again, for visual support, auditory, and physical. So the Ease of Access Center, what I'm going to do with you now, I'm sharing my screen with you, and I'm just going to go into these settings and show you exactly how they work and how you might go into and change the settings, etc. So if I pull up here from the Start menu control panel, and then you can see in this setup along here, I've got the Ease of Access Center logo. And this gives me quick access to the most common things that I might want to change when it comes to accessibility. So firstly, I might want to think about how I could make the computer easier to see. So there's a bunch of options in here. What I can do, I can choose a different visual theme, a high contrast theme. So if black on white isn't really working for the person who's using that machine, I can choose a theme from these high contrasts. I'm not going to change it now because for some reason it doesn't like the webinar interface. But you can see from these schemes along the bottom, the Windows Basic and Windows Classic, these are the typical ones where you've got lots of blues and greys and blacks. For some people, that might just not be suitable. This shows you roughly how it changes the menu bars and the windows as they pop up on the screen. So I can have high contrast with blues and purples and greens. And they are all configurable if need be. I can go into further settings and change those. Now, for some users, it might be that they need to come in and out of those on certain times of day or in certain lighting conditions. They might need a very high contrast scheme, and other situations they might be able to cope with it just as a standard. So that's a high contrast themes. What I can also do is turn on narrator. Now this is a function that reads out everything that's on the screen. It's generally known as a screen reader for that purpose. So if I turn that on and click apply, you should be able to hear it speaking to me now. So I'm just going to exit from that now, but you get the general idea that it does read out any text that appears on the screen and any boxes that pop up, any settings, anything like that. Now, this is a good way to introduce someone to maybe the concept of a screen reader, but narrator within Windows isn't really suitable for someone who needs to rely on it as their main way of accessing a PC. There are other third-party screen readers out there like JAWS and one from a company called Dolphin, and they're much more highly featured and they are much more likely to be able to read everything on the screen. Narrator works mostly, and a lot of blind people say they might use it as a backup if their normal software isn't working. But it is it's by no means something that should be recommended as a total solution for anyone. So I just make sure that's turned off. The other thing that you can do is use the magnifier, which is very straightforward. If I turn that on now and apply, you'll be able to see a window appearing on the screen, a magnifying glass, and then I can increase the magnification. So as I move my mouse over things, you might not be able to see that, sorry, on the webinar link, but it's magnifying in a small window. You'll need to try that yourself, because I get the feeling that it's not actually showing up on your screens. Another critical thing you can do to make a difference is change the size of the text and the icons on the screen. So if I click this link here, change the size of text and icons, it gives me an overall setting for the size of text within anything in Windows, and the size of any icons that might appear on the desktop or anything like that. So smaller, or 100%, is your default. That's probably what you're seeing now. That's what your normal desktop will be set to. I can increase these to medium or larger. I'm not going to make the change now because it requires a restart, but have a bit of a play with that yourself and see the difference it makes. Now, I've worked with loads of individuals who just this small change can make all the difference. They might just be struggling to see things that are on the screen at what we would call a standard size, but generally is really quite small. And just increasing to 125% or 150% can make all the difference. I can also do change the other way things work, like the thickness of the blinking cursor. So when you're in Word or another word processing program, and that cursor is blinking to show where your letters are going to appear when you type. Some people call it the carrots. Sometimes that can be really thin and really hard for people to pick up visually where it is. So I can increase that to as thick as I like. As you can see it changing on the screen, and then I'm able to see that a lot more clearly. I can also sorry, I clicked the wrong thing there. I can also decide I want to do things like turn off all unnecessary animations, remove background images. Whenever that's possible, Windows will stop that happening, and it will just stop it being a bit of a distraction for a lot of people. Okay, so that's the visual effects that you can change. The other things that I can do is change the way the mouse pointer looks. So this is a really quite straightforward change that can make a big difference. So the typical mouse pointer is small and white, but you can see these settings on the screen. I can quite easily change that to be extra large and black. You might not be able to see the change, but if this is something you might need to go away and try, it will not only change the pointer, but it will change all the other icons that appear, like the egg timer and the line for typing, etc. And you can choose something which is appropriate. Now, this is something that I kind of think I don't really understand why it's not standard that it's large and black, why the standard is small and white, because most of the times when we're working on documents, we've got a white background and it can be really hard to see the mouse. So don't feel afraid to change that to black for individuals. I don't think anyone is going to complain. Now, if I go further down, I can go into mouse settings here and change some more of the properties of the mouse. I can change the double click speed. A lot of people do struggle to get those 2 clicks in the right time. So I can slow that right down so that they've got a lot more time between the clicks. And rather than on the standard speed. I can turn on click lock to show that, and what this does is enables me to, instead of having to click and drag and keep the mouse button held down while I'm moving the mouse around the screen, I can click once, it holds onto it for me, I move my mouse, and then I click again to release the icon. And that can be really handy for people using just a standard mouse, but also some of the other alternative mice that we'll think about later. Sometimes that click lock feature can be really useful. Another pointer option is deciding how fast you want that mouse pointer to move. So if someone is really struggling with accuracy, I can slow that right down, and then as they move their mouse around, it requires much more input of mouse movement to get the pointer to move on the screen. And that can really help someone who's struggling with their fine motor skills and just give them a bit more control over that. What I could do is also I can speed that right up, and that means that I need to make very tiny movements to be able to move the pointer around the screen. So for someone who's got very limited movement, it might be that they need a very fine response to be able to make small movements but still be able to get the mouse all the way around the screen. And that can be it can be a question of just tweaking that really for the individual and finding the right setting for them. Now, Snap to just below that, if you go to save a document and a little dialog box appears on your screen, then you generally have to move your mouse pointer from wherever it was onto that dialog box and click save or yes, that kind of thing. Snap to will know that box has popped up, and it will automatically move the pointer over the button in there. So you have to be a bit careful that you don't accidentally click on things, but it means that people have to do a lot less mouse movement because they're not constantly having to move between these dialog boxes. Whenever it senses there's a box that's popped up, it will automatically jump to it. Okay, that's probably enough about mice changes for mice or mouses. Making the keyboard easier to use. There's a few settings in here. One is called sticky keys, and what this does is saves you having to hold down two keys at one time. So this can be really useful for someone who types with one hand or who has a very limited reach. And what it means they're able to do, instead of having to say hold down Control and press P for print, they can just tap the Control key and then tap the P key, and the Control will be held down for them, and then it will release after they've pressed the second key. Now there's settings here to tweak it to someone's individual preferences, but generally that's something that's just really useful for someone who might be struggling to hold down one key and press another. Filter keys is another option. If you turn on filter keys, then you're able to change some of these options in here. So if a learner has a tremor and when they're typing, they might unintentionally tap a key twice, what you can do is you can get the filter key setting here, bounce keys, to ignore that second press. So get it to wait half a second before it accepts another key press. And this is, again, something that needs quite fine tweaking, because if you set the time too long, it could be really frustrating if someone's trying to type a double E and then they can't get the second one because they're having to wait too long for it. So work with the individual and set the time limit to meet their requirements. The other thing I could do here instead of that is I could turn on slow keys, and what this does is it will ignore or slow down the keyboard repeat rate. So if I tap a key and I accidentally hold it down, instead of getting a screen full of, if I tap G, instead of getting a screen full of G's, it's going to wait 2 seconds before it types the next G. And again, that can be great for someone who can get to the key fine, but they just struggle to get off the key quickly. Right, let's just come out of there. So that's really in terms of keyboard settings. Apart from, you can also turn on toggle keys, so you get to hear a tone when you tap the caps lock, num lock, or scroll lock, just as an extra clue. If someone accidentally hits caps lock a lot, you can turn that on, and they'll get a warning that they've done that. Let's just come out of that, and we'll go back to the main panel. One thing you might have noticed as I'm coming in and out of this is that it's flashing black and white on the screen. Now, this is called Sound Sentry, and it just happens to be turned on my profile already. And this is a visual notification for a sound. So if someone's deaf or hard of hearing, then you can get a visual notification when something's happening. So if an email comes through or it pings at you because you've made an error, then it will flash whatever you choose. So I've got it at the minute setting to flash the active window, or you can have it just flash the caption bar at the top, or flash the whole desktop. And so what's happening as I'm going in and out of these windows is that there's a normal click in and out of these settings, and when that click happens, it's flashing the active window in the front. So now you know what's happening. You might be able to observe it as I'm going back towards that. It does a black and then back to white. So that's it essentially for the main features within the Ease of Access Center. There is a setting within Windows that I'm not going to go into too much, or not going to into at all, sorry, today, of voice recognition. So you can use voice recognition and speak into Windows and have it recognize your voice and produce text. The reason I'm not going to go into that is it is getting better as a system, and it's much better on Windows 10 than it is on, say, Windows 7, but it's still not a great system. It's really not very good. If someone needs voice activation and voice recognition, they really should be looking at higher end package like Dragon Naturally Speaking. And this is another situation where it is well worth spending the money. And I use the analogy generally of, if you were a young person, you were starting to play golf, and your uncle or someone gave you their cast-off golf clubs, and they were bent and they were rusty, and they gave you balls that were half chewed by a dog. When you started to play golf, you'd have a really bad experience, and that might make you give up. And the same can be true of a lot of this assistive technology. I've known people who've started, they've said, oh, right, well, look, we've got this free system within Windows of voice recognition. Let's start with that, and if that works, oh well, then we'll know it's worth spending the money to on something like Dragon Naturally Speaking. That's totally the wrong way to go about it. What you want the individual to do is to start with a really good experience and work, have something that works really well, so that they want to carry on with it. And that's why I always encourage people in those sort of situations where it's really critical the technology works well, to start with that high-end thing. So that's why I talked about the screen readers before, something like JAWS, and the same is true with speech recognition technology. Make sure you start with a quality system. Okay, so that's it for the Ease of Access Center. I'll just close that down. Before we move on, I want to make sure I talk a little bit about roaming profiles, because this can be one of your biggest accessibility wins within your setting. What a roaming profile is, means when you log on to a PC, then it has your settings there, and then if you log off that PC and log off to a different PC, it still retains those settings. They follow you around. So when roaming profiles are set up, well, the Ease of Access Center settings, all the accessibility settings, should be applied at logon. And what this means is we can then say to any learner, right, let's tweak this, let's get it set up for you, let's make it work. And then when you just log on to any PC within the college or within the setting, then we know it'll be set up for you. So something as simple as the size of the mouse pointer or the speed that the mouse moves around, all of that can be held within a roaming profile. And it will mean that individual doesn't have to then go in and change it every time on every machine that they're on. It also means that if you, as a professional, are working with those individuals, you can make some changes with them, and then you don't have to keep going out and helping them make those changes. It works well for the student, it works well for the staff in terms of resources. And again, this is something that I struggle to understand why it's not applied more widely, but sometimes I go into colleges and find that they don't have roaming profiles. Well, again, this is something you want to be bringing up with your technical staff and finding out why not. And if they say it's too hard, well, get in touch with me and I'll be able to put them in touch with someone who will be able to talk them through it. I've never done it myself because I'm not a network technician, but my network tech says it can easily be done in about half a day and it can be implemented. So something really to check out and check whether those settings follow your learners around from PC to PC. Okay, let's move on now to iPad access. And again, focusing on the iPad because it's the most frequently used tablet out there, but it's also the tablet which has the most accessibility settings built in, and it's why I always recommend it to, especially if it's tablets that are for multiple use by multiple different learners, then the iPad has loads of accessibility settings built in. Android has some of these built in, but it is quite a way behind, and it's catching up slowly, but it's not quite there yet. So again, a lot of these settings can be visual changes, auditory changes, physical changes to enable access. Now, for any iPad app, changing these accessibility settings should influence the app. The app should be compatible. In reality, this isn't the case, and sometimes you get an app that just hasn't fulfilled all the criteria that it should to get on the App Store, and it won't work with some of these accessibility settings. But again, you never know that until you try it with the app, so it's really hard to say what does and what doesn't. So what I'm going to do now is I've got a screen share set up here. Let me just make sure I can log in because it seems to have logged me out. And I can show, just so I can show you my iPad screen. Sorry about this. We'll just get the meeting set up. And let's join that. So any second now, you should be able to see my iPad screen on your screen. Okay, there we go. So sorry about that. So now, standard iPad screen. If I go into settings and general, then you'll see that there's an accessibility tab there in the middle of the right-hand bar. If I go into that, it gives me all of these options that I can use to influence the accessibility of the iPad. So I'm just going to run through a few of these just because of time, but again, they're worth exploring if you're using iPads in your setting. Go into these and have a play around with them. So one of the first ones I can use is VoiceOver, and this is a screen reader. Again, it will tell me about anything that's written on the screen. The iPad, it should tell me the names of any buttons as well and things like that. So if I turn that on, you should be able to hear my iPad talking now. And as I highlight various things, it tells me what's happening on the screen. Now I can change the speed of that voice. I can change what it tells me about the setup and what's actually on the screen, the level of detail, if you like. Now you wouldn't expect a touchscreen device to be used by someone who's blind because it doesn't lend itself. There's no tactile markers and things like that on the screen. But actually, because of VoiceOver being built into iPads and iPhones specifically, then they're generally the choice of people who are blind. So a lot of blind people will use iPhones because this feature is built in, and it's been built in from the very start. So takes a bit of getting used to, and obviously not generally useful to you unless you're blind or unless your sight is very poor. So but well worth knowing it's there for anyone who's visually impaired. So I'll just turn that off. The other feature for people with vision impairment is zoom. So if I turn this on, what I'm going to do now, it's quite hard to explain without seeing it, but I'm going to tap twice on the screen with 3 fingers. And what will happen then is the screen will zoom in, and then I can move those 3 fingers around the screen and it will follow it around. What I can also do is double tap but hold my fingers on, and then I can zoom the level in and out. So it might be a bit glitchy on your screen, but I can zoom in and out and get the level of zoom that I want. And this is a really useful shortcut because for a lot of people, they might be using the iPad and they might need to zoom in on a particular word to read it, or they might need to zoom in on a picture to look around it. So you can tweak a lot of the settings on that as well. I can get some speech output from the iPad. This is a really great feature called Speak Selection. Now, if I'm in a website and I want to know what a word says, and I can highlight the text much like I do with anything on an iPad. So here's something about the beast from the east. If I hold on and do a highlight of some of this text, then normally I'd just get up a link that says copy or look up, that kind of thing. But this now gives me a link that says speak. So if I tap on speak, beast from the east where? So it will only read out the text that I've highlighted, but really useful feature that for people with literacy difficulties. It might just be the occasional word that they come across that they want it read out, or just a sentence. Now, unfortunately, if you want to use that feature, you have to go into the settings and turn it on. But once it's on, it stays on, and then that will always be an option whenever you highlight or select any text. Another feature there is Speak Screen. That anything on the screen, if that's on, I swipe down with 2 fingers from the top, and then I can hear it will read out to me whatever is on the screen. Okay, I can change the size of the text very easily just by sliding this bar, and it will change the text, as you can see on your screen. And again, that will change the text in any app. So anything with a text content, it should reflect that within the app. I can, let me just show you this one more feature, Assistive Touch. This is a great feature physically for people who physically struggle to access the iPad. If I turn it on, there you'll see in the top left of the iPad a small button appear, circular button. So when I tap that, it gives me a menu, and I've got access then to lots of controls that I might find hard if, say, I'm only able to use 1 finger to tap. So one of them might be in here, you have the pinch control. So I normally use 2 fingers to pinch in and out of a photograph. With this, I can just drag it with 1 finger and it will do the pinch for me. I can use a lot of the settings on the device that I might struggle with. If I struggle to get to the volume control, then I could use this just by tapping on volume control up and down, rotate the screen. In their wisdom, when they invented the iPad, someone decided that the undo command should be to shake the iPad, which is really ridiculous if you ask me. And it's really tricky to do if you can't pick up the iPad and shake it. So what you can do here, you can just tap and it will do the shake for you. So loads of settings you're able to get to just by single taps and going into this this assistive touch setting. Even things like pressing the home button if you can't access the home button. So I'm going to leave it there for iPads. There's loads more in there and loads of settings, well worth playing with. There's quite a lot of documentation on the Apple site, but I'll give you a better website towards the end of this webinar, which will tell you about all these settings and how to get in and out of them and what they do and what they're useful for. So let's switch back now to the presentation. What I want to do is just give you a few pointers towards some useful iPad apps, and these two are both actually made by Microsoft, but they're available on iPad, and the first one, Office Lens, is also available on Android. What Office Lens does is it enables you to really easily take clear pictures of posters and notes for learners who like to use pictures a lot. Sometimes the pictures can be really bad and really grainy, and they're hard to use as notes later. What Office Lens does is things like this. You take a picture of a piece of paper which might be just sat on a desk. It will clean it up for you, straighten it out, and make it a lot easier to read. It will also recognize any printed text, what's called optical character recognition, or OCR, and it will be able to then read that out to you and read the document out to you. Things like this, a photograph of a whiteboard, too much clutter, too much going on in the background, it will take it down into something like this. It's picking out the critical information that it needs, the writing, and makes it into a much more useful image for someone who wants to use images for recording rather than notes. So really great for settings for someone who might have literacy difficulties and they need to record stuff. They need a photo of a poster. They need a photo of a whiteboard with some critical information on it. The second app to tell you about is called Seeing AI. Now this is really interesting and fairly groundbreaking app. You can see the picture on the screen shows you, it's telling you there's a 30-year-old man with black hair, wearing glasses and looking happy. This app is using artificial intelligence. You take a photo or you point the camera of the iPad or the iPhone at something and it will make a fairly good guess as to what that is. So you could point it at the corner of a room and it will say a desk with a computer on and a chair in front. It will make, it's not always totally accurate with ages, but it will make a guess at someone's age and describe them to you so you can get some clue. You can point it at, you can set it on color mode, point it at colors, it will tell you what the colors are as you move the camera around. You can also store names of people. So if this guy's name was Brian, you could label him up, save it and label him up as Brian, and the next time you hold the camera up in a room, if Brian's there, it will say Brian and 3 other people. There's loads of different features within it. It's free to download. Both of these apps that I've mentioned are free to download. Seeing AI will even recognize most handwriting. It struggles with mine, but for most handwriting, it will be able to, you can point it at, say, a birthday card, and it will read out the content of what someone's written. So really useful app for people with visual impairment. Could be a really useful app as well for people with literacy difficulties. Could be a useful app for people who struggle to with memory to remember faces or recognize faces. So lots of features designed, you can guess from the name Seeing AI, it's designed for blind people, but I can think of loads more applications out there for it. So that's a couple of iPad apps. What else could you get for free? What else is out there? Here's a couple of applications that are designed for use on PCs. The first one, totally free. You might well have it already. Office 365. Now, this has a load of built-in accessibility. Now, remember, this does have to be Office 365 to get all of these features. It can't be the standard Office that might be installed locally on your computer. It has to be the version that is Office 365. But they're building in, Microsoft are doing loads of work around accessibility at the minute, and they're building in accessibility into the normal tools. So within OneNote, which at first glance is just a note-taking app, they're building in things like being able to dictate straight into it. So learners can just talk in and it will come up with the text. They can dictate into it. It will read aloud text to them. It will highlight it as it goes, highlight each word as it's reading it. You can change the color themes to make it suitable for someone's vision, or if someone's got dyslexia and they need a light blue background or say a light yellow background, it's really easy to change the themes for that person's notes. And then it's got immersive reader, so you can see an example of immersive reader on the slide here. What it's done is it's highlighted the verbs, the adjectives, and it's also broken it up into syllables for easy reading. Obviously, a lot of this stuff is probably targeted at primary level, but it can be really useful for older learners who are developing their reading skills. And it's also good because it's in a standard application like Office 365. It isn't like it's a something that's been created for primary age children, but you're having to, which you wouldn't want to put in front of an older learner. It's integrated into the tool. What they're doing with this is they're also changing it so that they're able to build, those tools are getting built into Word and other packages as well. So Office 365 is going to be really, really accessible, and it's changing pretty much week on week. There's more and more tools coming out. On the right of your screen is XMind, which is a mind mapping package. Now, mind mapping is a really useful technique for learners who struggle with organization or structure. Now, typically that might be someone with dyslexia, but obviously not always. I use mind mapping all the time. It's great for organizing when you just want to get all your ideas down initially, and then work on an essay structure or assignment structure later. Can be great for recording meetings and making sure everything's down. Now, a lot of people do it manually on paper, but XMind is a free package to be able to do it on screen. Well worth recommending and getting people to try it if they struggle with organization. You can then output it and it will do you a kind of miniature structure into a Word document. And there's loads of mind mapping packages out there, but XMind is really quite good. And even if you buy it, it's not very expensive. But there is a free version which can enable you to see the features and see how it works and get used to the technique. So finally, what if none of that works? We've talked a lot about changing settings. We've talked a lot about standard things which might be there. But what if you've gone in and you've done all that and it's still not suitable for the learner? It's still not right. Well, firstly, from a physical access point of view, there's alternative mice you can use. There's the standard mouse can be really tricky for a lot of people to use. So there's things like rollerballs out there. There's one on the left of the screen there, which is a kind of mainstream device that you might be able to buy in PC World or somewhere like that. And you scoot the ball around with your fingertips, and the left and right click are on the left and right of the mouse there. Whereas things like the rollerball on the right of the screen are much more specialist device. It's much larger. You could use your whole hand. The buttons are sunken into the case, so you can't press them accidentally. You can get all sorts of joysticks, a bit like the one in the middle of the screen, where to move the pointer around, you're moving like an old-fashioned joystick on a computer game, but you hold it left and it moves the mouse pointer across the screen. Trackpads can be really great for people who have minimal movement. So a trackpad is like the thing you get on the bottom of the keyboard on a laptop. And if that's really useful and learners find that they can do things well just by moving one finger around on those, there are trackpads you can get which just stand alone and they just plug in by USB. So they're available, and you can use them standalone rather than having to use a laptop if someone doesn't want to use a laptop. The thing to remember with these alternative mice, though, is you have to use them in combination with the settings that we looked at earlier for mice, particularly the speed setting. So when you use something like a rollerball, if you leave it on the standard speed that you would use for a mouse, it will scoot across the screen really quickly. So move that speed down before the learner tries this, and then they're going to get a much better experience from the outset. With the joystick, it might be the opposite. It might be that the pointer moves too slowly across the screen because you're having to hold it to get it from one side to the other. So you want to tweak it to be able to get a faster speed for that. So make sure that you don't just, if you've got any of this kit, don't just plug it in and expect it to work. You also need to change the settings and make sure they're fitting. Alternative keyboards, again, there's loads out there. They generally fall into the category of either it's going to be larger or it's going to be smaller. So for large keyboards, the ones on the left, the keys on those might be probably about twice as big as a standard keyboard key. But the footprint of the keyboard is roughly the same. So it doesn't take up much more desk space, but the keys are a lot larger. So if someone is hitting more than one key at once and they can't get to just pressing one key, a larger keyboard might help for them to improve their targeting. But also visually, if someone has a visual impairment and they can't see a standard keyboard, then a larger key is going to help. Visually as well, you might want a keyboard like the one on the right, which is a standard size, but it is a high visibility keyboard. The letters are bright yellow and they're a lot larger. As well as going larger, you might want to go smaller. So you might want the keys the same size, but actually the keyboard takes up too much space. And one example of this could be someone who is in a wheelchair and they need to have the keyboard and a mouse on the tray mounted on the front of their wheelchair. Now, generally, I find there's not enough room for a full-size keyboard and a mouse to go on there. So using a compact keyboard, you're just getting a keyboard like the one in the center of the screen that hasn't got the number pad on it or any of the extra keys. It's just got the letters and the number row, and that saves you a lot of space. The one in the center of your screen as well, there has a key guard on it. This is a metal plate with holes over each key, and someone can rest their hand then and move across to get to the key they want to without accidentally pressing keys. And it's easy. They also will need to isolate their finger to get to the key, so it makes it impossible to press two keys at once because with one finger, because you've got to get your finger into the hole. For tablet access, There's lots of other ways that you might want to access a tablet other than just with your finger. And there's a range out there of styluses or styli, however you want to call, whichever you want to call them. And these might assist users who can't point or who might have trouble isolating one finger. So you can see a range of them there. There's loads of different ones out there. There's a company called Assistive who sell a range of these. Also, iPad mounting. It might be tricky to be able to, for some people, to be able to hold the iPad or any other tablet while they are using it. And these kind of devices that you see enable it to be attached to a table or maybe to the arm of a chair or the arm of a wheelchair, and mean that that person can use it one-handed and get it into an ideal position. So there's loads of different types of those out there. These ones you see on your screen, I think, are from Inclusive Technology, and they sell a wide range, and it's all dependent on the size of your tablet and the size and how you want it mounted as to which is the most suitable mounting. So we're going to end with a few useful links. The first one, and probably the most important one, is called My Computer My Way. This is a site made by an organization called AbilityNet, and all of the settings that I've talked about today and loads more are detailed on this site. If you want to know how to change the pointer size in Windows, but you don't want to watch this presentation again, go to this site and it will take you through it step by step. If you want to know how to do that zooming thing I showed you on iPad, it tells you on this site. Has all the normal operating systems that you come across and all of the accessibility settings. So it's well worth a look. All I've done here is give you some links. This presentation can be sent out to you on request. And there are links here to the apps that I mentioned, Office Lens and Seeing AI. There's also a link to all the accessibility features within Office 365 and a link to Xmind, the mind mapping package. So here's my details. If you've got any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me directly, or obviously through the ETF Foundation. Please give any feedback to ETF about this webinar and what you thought of it. Other than that, that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much for your time and for listening.